So welcome as we continue with our next installment of our series on peace. Next week we're going to have Raj Kotadust, and he's going to talk about peace from the Baha'i perspective. So please come for that. That's going to be fun and interesting. We always love it when Raj comes. So today we are going to talk a little bit about what a world at peace might look like. We've talked about inner peace. Last week we talked about how we live peace, and we talked about the golden rule. Remember our PowerPoint and our God's tweets, my personal favorite, and the iteration of the golden rule in all the different faith traditions of the world, or at least some of them. Today we're going to take a look at what a world at peace might look like. And I want to start you thinking about that, and I want, as you leave here today, I want you to continue to think about it. Chris Kell found a great quote that is on the front of our bulletins, but it says, as I reach for the front of our bulletins, it says, if we don't begin by imagining the perfect society, how shall we create one? So that's how we start. We start by thinking about what a world at peace might look like. I mean, we know this. This is Law of Attraction 101. We see it, we believe it can happen, and then we stand up and we start moving toward it. And I just want to start us thinking about that a little bit today. So as I was researching this talk, I came across an article entitled A Global Village, a social snapshot of our world. And it was fascinating. What it did is it took the world's populations and the world's countries and it shrank them down to a global village of 1,000 people. All right, so let's pretend we have 7.5 billion people in the world, which we do, and 193 countries, or however many we have. I think that's about how many we have. And they shrank all that variety and diversity and wealth of differences down to one global village of 1,000 people. For me, this was a helpful way to get a sense of what our world looks like in a way that is kind of cognitively more manageable for me. When I think of 7.5 billion people, I have no idea what that means. That's way too many people, so shrinking it down was quite helpful for me. Okay, so shrinking it down to the mythical 1,000 people, let's take a look at some statistics that they found. Now, this article was written in October of 2015. So in our village, more than half of the inhabitants, or about 603 people, would be Asian, including 194 people from the People's Republic of China. In terms of numbers, we would then have 149 Africans, 107 Europeans, 85 people from Latin America and the Caribbean, 5 people from Australia and the South Pacific, and 50 North Americans, including 45 from the U.S. in our village of 1,000 people. All right, so then we take a little closer look at our quality of life issues, and we get some surprises. The village is a very rich place. There's enough food for everybody, there's enough water for everybody, there is plenty to go around. However, the goods and services are out of reach for most of the village's residents. 75% of the village's total income is earned by 200 people, or 20% of the population. The biggest problem is getting food in this village where there's enough for everybody. Every year the village produces enough to feed everybody, but about 130 people in the village, or 13%, do not get enough to eat. These 130 residents together have less money than the single richest person in our village. And they lack adequate food, safe water, adequate housing. Because of these basic resources, they are weak, they often cannot work, and they are much more prone to fall to disease and early death. The village has a great many schools, including a very good university, but only about 67 people have graduated from it. And about 1/5 of the villagers are not able to read or write. So, let's take those numbers of our 1,000-person mythical village, and let's expand them to the global village of what is actually there of 7.5 billion people. And you get a sense of how our resources are used and shared, or are not shared, even though there is enough for all of us. I focused on the 13%. Those 130 people who couldn't get clean water, adequate housing, or adequate food. On a global scale, those 130 people translated into 975 million people. It took me a while to do that math because, as I said, I couldn't get my hands around it, so I had to go to the Google. But that's 13% of 7.5 billion. Moving past our global decision not to share basic resources such as food and water. You know, it's funny, I had it originally written in our failure, but it's not, it's a decision. It's a decision we all make on a global level not to share that food and water and resources with people who need them. Let's take a look at how we get along. Let's take a look at violence and let's take a look at conflict. In 2016, the world became a less peaceful place, primarily due to increases in regional conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa, although in many places violence did decrease. You can have it improve in some places and diminish in other places. Political disruption and instability increased in numerous countries across the globe. We see this in our global refugee crisis. I know some of you have read about that. We have a massive humanitarian crisis going on in terms of refugees across our globe. In 2015, there were over 57 million refugees and internally displaced people. That is up from 2000, in which the number was about 21 million. 21 million to 57 million in 15 years. This is a huge number of men, women, and children without the stability of a home, a place to go to, or without the sense of just even basic safety to get through the day or the next couple days. Every day we see stories of human desperation as people flee across thousands of miles of open land, as they take to the open sea to cross hundreds of miles in boats that you and I would not take on a lake for a half an hour. What these people are willing to do is astonishing as they seek a peaceful life, which for many is nothing but a memory or perhaps a dream. So let's think about peace. Let's think about what is peace. It's really more than the absence of conflict. The Institute for Economics and Peace puts out, thank God there are places like that, you know, the Institution of Economics and Peace, they put out a yearly report called the Global Peace Index. And it charts the growth or the decline of peace in regions across the world, and it gives you supporting facts and figures. It's an interesting report. I have it, if anybody would like to read it. In 2016, the Global Peace Index contained a section on what they called positive peace. Positive peace. So negative peace is what we think of when we think about peace across the world. Negative peace is an absence of people shooting at each other, right? Now, that is often not peace. That's more frequently what we call an opportunity to reload. But it is at least the absence for the moment of violence or the fear of violence. However, negative peace does not include the absence of factors that promote violence or fear of it. Those factors are still there, and they're waiting to come back. Negative peace is really nothing more than just a pause between clashes. When you take a look at our world, when you take a look at the factors that motivate us, especially on a societal level, and here I'm not so much talking about individuals, I'm talking about nations or cities or communities or nation states. And actually this is true about individuals too. We are governed by our need to dominate, aren't we? Our need to win and our need to have, our wish to have. In our little reptilian brains, we think that the world is a zero-sum place. And if you have it, it means I don't have it. It's governed by the idea that what is mine is not yours. That I win when I get what is yours, when I get more, when I am in power over you. That is so often the thinking that drives our political decisions that we read about every day. Thomas Merton writes, and he's talking about capitalism, and he's talking about the way we have constructed our global nation states. He writes, "We have to recognize that a spirit of individualism and confusion has reduced us to an ethic of every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost." Every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost. This ethic, which unfortunately sometimes consecrated by Christian formulas, is nothing but the secular ethic of the affluent society, based on the false assumption that if everyone is bent on making money for himself, the common good will automatically follow due to the operation of economic laws. I think we've seen in our world that that does not always work. We have been taught that we have the right to take what is ours, that it's weak to give, that it's weak to share. And often, when we decide to give for no reason or to share for no reason, we're kind of caught in an emotional no man's land because we don't know if what we're doing is right. We don't know how to feel about what we're doing because it so strongly goes against what we are taught. But what we are taught and what we are doing is not working. So let's take a look at what the Global Peace Index calls positive peace. They define it as the attitudes, institutions, and structures which create and sustain peaceful societies. It's a way of living. It's true that it is all of us being peaceful, but it's also the institutions we put in place, the attitudes we have, and the structures we build to sustain that and encourage it. I spoke a while back about His Holiness the Dalai Lama's recent book, A Force for Good, which he wrote as he passed his 80th birthday. When he turned 80, he decided that it was time to pass on to the world his roadmap for a better world, a kinder and more compassionate future for humanity. So Daniel Goleman, with whom he wrote the book, agreed, and he spent many hours with the Dalai Lama speaking about his vision for the future of the humanity and how we step through kind of the minefield we have laid for ourselves into a future of compassion and peace. And the result was his book, A Force for Good, the Dalai Lama's vision for our world. And even though he is a religious leader, he's a very refreshing religious leader, because he really doesn't care if you're religious or not. What he says is he doesn't care what religion you follow. What he cares is that we are good people, that we are kind people, that we behave well toward each other. If we believe that that is the highest calling of the human spirit, that is how we will behave. And so he worries less about the theologies that we follow. He also says that he's tired of speaking to the same Buddhists, and he wants to speak to the 7 billion people on the planet, whether they believe in God or not. He knows that religion does not have a monopoly on morality. He focuses on the values that we all share of kindness and peace and compassion. And he calls on us, individually and collectively, to create counterforces that build the world that we want. As I was researching this talk, I came across a great kind of notion. It's called backcasting. Has anyone heard of backcasting? Okay, we all know what forecasting is. Forecasting is taking the world that we have it now and saying in 15 years, stand by, it's all going to go straight to you know where. That's forecasting. Or it's all going to be great, whatever. But we take where we are now and we look ahead. Backcasting is taking where we want to be and asking ourselves, what do we need to do now to get there? We see where we want to be and we say, how do we get there? That's what I want to look like. That's what I want our world to be. I don't want to have to lock my car. I don't want to have to worry about people coming up and committing violence upon me or my city. That's backcasting. What do we have to do to get there? He calls on us, in a sense, to backcast, even though he doesn't use that word, to create counterforces that build the world that we see, that we know is possible. So where do we start? Well, as he says, the transformation begins with us, with a compassionate heart inside each of us. We each become centers of peace, and we know that. We've talked about that, I was going to say for the past 2 weeks, but we've talked about it since September 11, 2011 when we started. That is what we do. That is what all of us do and what we continue to try to spread. We become centers of peace and compassion in our own lives. It's like Catherine said about Sydney. What is it you bring out the best in us? You know, just being around someone like that, it brings out the best in us. And when we each go out and we are each like that to the extent we can, then maybe we bring out better in other people. So that's where we start. The Dalai Lama writes, once we feel compassion alive in our minds, you see no basis to killing, to bullying, to cheating. All these unhappy ways of acting are based on the concept of us and them. We think we should just look after ourselves. I should look after me and not care about anyone else. We exploit others. We have to get that under control. living a life of compassion helps us focus on the oneness of all humanity in developing what he calls a universal ethic of compassion toward all. On a societal level, since we're talking about a peaceful world, how do we know